right, well, it looks like it's 7, and looks very likely that we have a quorum here, so let's go ahead and get started. If you could call the roll, please.
Maria Ryan,
Here.
Bart Bartels,
Here.
Todd Rusk,
Here.
Andrew Stump,
Here.
Rachel Valenga, Steve Wald, Ryan Wolber.
All right, well, I do want to welcome Andrew to the commission. It's your first meeting, and I'm very glad you stepped forward to join us. And Andrew is a geologist at the Illinois State Geological Survey, which is a division of the Prairie Research Institute. And I think we have, several folks from that institute already on the commission at the U of I Urbana campus. And Andrew has lived in the area since 2000 and has a bachelor's degree in geography and geology and a master's and PhD in geology. And he's a member of the local, national, and international organizations that focus on issues related to geology and hydrogeology. And I understand you're on the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium as well. Is that?
I'm a member. Yeah.
You're a member? Great. I don't know if there are any other things you...
No.
All right. That's great. That's a perspective that we have not had on this commission as of yet, so that's great to have you. Do we have any changes to the agenda this evening? Let's move on to the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting?
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, those are approved. And are there any members of the public who wish to address us this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to communications, our monthly staff report.
Good evening. First, some updates with the Climate Action Plan. The Urbana-Champaign Energy Star Challenge has 49 buildings registered. Our original goal was 50. We do anticipate the university signing up a building or two soon, as well as another current registrant adding a few more buildings. So I'm pretty confident we're going to get that goal hopefully next month. Our second level goal was to get at least half of those buildings to submit a 2013 baseline score for their building in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So that would be 25 buildings. We've got 22, actually 23 as of this afternoon. 23 buildings have submitted their 2013 Energy Star score or energy use intensity score. So we're moving along pretty well with those goals. I am currently moving on to our greenhouse gas. We're going to talk about this more later, but currently working to reset our 2007 greenhouse gas inventory and also establish our 2013 inventory. I believe all the data that we need is in for 2007. Still waiting for transportation data from the Regional Planning Commission for the 2013. They just are still processing that data. So what I've done and what I'll show you tonight is for 2013 I've just entered the same values that we had for 2007 for that particular line item. Really interesting and exciting announcement. I spoke with the Illinois Science and Energy Foundation recently. This is the group that is responsible for doing public education as Smart Grid rolls out to different cities throughout the Ameren service territory. And they say that they expect Smart Grid meters to be rolled out in the Urbana area next calendar year. So that'll be an equipment change outside your building, and that'll facilitate you to have probably an updated, or, for yourself, procure an updated programmable thermostat inside your house, your commercial building, and that's going to give you a much finer grain level of control over your building. Depending on lots of technology, which I'm not an expert on, but this group will be educating us on, you may be able to do time of use pricing. You may be able to start and stop different appliances in your house based on time of use pricing, based on load profile. So this is really interesting. And what they're going to be doing is seeking out local partners to do grant funding to in order to educate the public on what smart meters are and what they can do with them. So what we've told the group is that keep us engaged. We will help them identify groups to talk to that might be worthy of grant funding. And we want to stay engaged in a conversation so that we can leverage this opportunity for as much of the, the behavior piece that we can get done in terms of energy efficiency.
Scott, can you repeat the name of that organization one more time?
It's the Illinois Science and Energy Foundation.
And that's for residences, not businesses?
I don't know if they're the only targeting they mentioned to me was targeting low-income households. Now, I don't know if that means that I don't know if the meters go to commercial facilities also, or if it's only residential, and I don't know if they're going to be doing education to commercial facilities. This is all to be learned soon, hopefully. And let's see. Oh, another great announcement. The city of Urbana was awarded Ameren's 2013 Most Progressive City Award. The award goes to cities that have demonstrated extraordinary achievements, I should say cities and their businesses, that have achieved extraordinary accomplishments in energy efficiency. 45 Urbana businesses completed 94 energy efficiency projects with Acton Energy in their 2012-2013 program year. They leveraged over $100,000 in incentive money and saved over $150,000 a year in energy costs. So there was a nice award presentation from Ameren, and there's an article on the city's website. A few businesses that have participated in Acton Energy came out as well. So that's a nice award, a nice recognition for our businesses who are working on energy efficiency. Oh, and the photos in the packet too there. There's a pie graph for progress on the Climate Action Plan. Some public engagement. Staff has been working with a learning in community class at the University of Illinois, and their final project, the poster session was actually tonight, not tomorrow night, unfortunately. Had the wrong date on that. But their final project was designed for a food scrap composting program at the Urbana Middle School. And so they've turned in a report and sort of a programmatic design to their middle school. They met with several science teachers there about implementation, and the status of that project is that those science teachers are working to schedule appropriate meetings with school administrators to see about project feasibility and see if they can move forward on that. The students also proposed to the LINC administrators, LINC Learning and Community, that implementation of this project should be a LINC class for the next semester. So they were really, really proud of the work they did and wanted to make sure that it got implemented in the next semester. I think I mentioned before that we have scheduled a rain barrel and compost bin sale May 17th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Compost bins are $50, rain barrels are $60. However, residents of Urbana or Champaign can use their stormwater utility rebate, which is a $25 rebate, to bring down the cost at the point of sale. So if residents show up with a tax bill with their name on it or a utility bill with their name on it, they can get that $25 rebate at the point of sale. They don't have to apply for it later on. I had been holding back a city facilities water use report for 2013, hoping that I would be able to combine it with citywide water use data for the whole community. That citywide data we get from the private water company. Something that has happened several times with different data sets that we've been working to get regularly is the person who queried that data in their system last year retired, and now nobody there knows how to query the data. It's just a it's a situation where their their computer systems are set up for billing, not for slicing up data along corporate lines, municipal lines.
Tell them to send you the query code this time so you can send it back to you next year.
That's probably a good idea. Some step-by-step instructions that we can all share. So I haven't got that yet. Illinois American is still working on that data, but I wanted to go ahead and share the city's water use. Now, we had set a goal with a 7-year implementation timeline to do a number of things, equipment changes to reduce water consumption in city facilities. And we had estimated that all of those activities would achieve a 24% reduction in water use. Our water use for 2013 compared to 2012 was 32% less. That's way over 24, but I suspect that that is not going to be repeated next year. We had a number of interesting things happen that are probably unique. So we had irrigation meters the previous year that were broken, and so using a lot more water than they should. We had irrigation meters in 2013 that were turned off because they were found to be broken and they hadn't been repaired yet. So I suspect in 2014, some of those meters will be repaired, turned back on, and water use will come back up a little bit. But in any event, it's still quite an achievement in 1 year. As you may know, there is a sole source aquifer designation public meeting. It's hosted by the U.S. EPA, inviting the public to comment on their proposed designation of the Mahomet Aquifer as a sole source aquifer. And on the city website, we have example language for anyone who is interested in submitting public comment via email or snail mail to U.S. EPA. And that's something we'll talk about for the commission a little later as well. We had set some goals in the water plan to work with other stakeholders in the Mahomet Aquifer region on collaboration towards efforts to protect quantity and quality of the aquifer. And to that effect, we have partnered with the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium, and we're working on a couple of different public engagement strategies that would be useful to roll out across the aquifer to all stakeholders, cities and other folks. And also looking at if there's some model ordinances that make sense for everyone. And so one of the prime ones that we're looking at is basically bringing locally a national EPA campaign called Fix a Leak Week. It's in March, so we have plenty of time to plan it for our region next year. But they just are taking a week to direct people's attention to how much water can be lost in leaky appliances that aren't fixed. And it's a good opportunity to talk about both the micro issue of your water bill and wasting water in one appliance and then connecting that to the aquifer issue. And there's a couple of other things in the council packet that we've talked about with the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium about how we can collaborate across the aquifer in useful ways. Staff participated in some Earth Day activities regarding U-Cycle, promoting U-Cycle. It's really important to do basic communications every single year with U-Cycle because a great deal of our service area turns over every single year with students. So we kind of have to start over every single year with with some number of residents in our community, in our service area. We also had a electronics recycling event this past month. We had over 1,000 vehicles drop electronic devices for recycling and collected 120,000 pounds of electronics. We also had U-Cycle staff also was successful in a grant application for 50 wireframe Clearstream recycling containers. You may have seen these are very popular at events because they are cheap, durable, and they are clear, so everyone can see what's in the bag. and that's useful for a number of reasons. If the bag is half full of water bottles, people know not to throw food scrap in there because they can see that's not what everyone else is throwing in there. That's kind of that social piece. It's also useful if the bag is substantially contaminated. Cleanup crews can just pick it up and throw it in the garbage without having to sort through it or dig through it and find out, do they want to try and recycle this or not. So we were successful in getting some grant money for purchasing a number of those. And our next meeting will be Tuesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. in council chambers.
Thank you. Any questions for Scott?
Scott, on the water savings, I wonder if you have any comments on the building side. It looked like there were substantial savings, and so maybe those are maybe a little bit more permanent than some of the irrigation ones. And so I see, the city building is a big chunk of that pie chart. So is that the data center? Anyways, just if you have comments on sources of, some explanation for the water savings on the building side.
Yeah, in that calendar year, the city building cooling system for the server room was replaced. It was a once-through water-cooled system. Now it's a modern coolant electricity system, so we traded water for energy there. So that's some of those savings. Some buildings have some irrigation connected to the same meter as the building. So Civic Center is an example of that. And in some instances, I've attempted to denote that by, so one of them is 108 East Water Irrigation Plus Building. I think that's the Civic Center. But sometimes we're not, the folks who know, where what's connected to what doesn't always translate into the report. I don't have other sources of building water savings. We have replaced faucet aerators in about 3/4 of the faucets in all the city facilities. There were some faucets that had non-standard sizes, and so that was a less quick replacement. And so we're setting aside time to seek out the right size and replace it. So there's some savings there as well. Substantial changes, though, it's hard to say, it's hard to attribute it to one particular cause, but those are a couple of possibilities.
Was there any change in irrigation practice, or do you think, there's just something maybe that's, you talked about the meters, so anomalies with that, but is there any change in irrigation practice?
I don't think there's been change in practice. There has been a lot of fluctuation in what meters are on and what meters are off, what meters are broken and on, what meters are being turned off because they're broken. Also, we've had some meters that are managed by a contractor. We contract out the maintenance for this entire area, including the meter, and either the meter doesn't work or the contractor doesn't know how to set it, or they're overriding it because they think, well, it looks too dry. So there's a lot of inconsistency there. That's one of the reasons, one of the motivations why we're applying for the ISTC sponsored research grant. We want to install a couple of irrigation controls, probably a rain sensor in one location and an evapotranspiration sensor at another location, so that we can hopefully get just the right amount of water and no more, and have it be controlled digitally by the device, take human error out of it, and then measure and see, do we actually get savings, and compare that qualitatively to, do the plants look good? Because if the plants all look bad, but we save water, that's probably not going to be feasible either.
Another thing that caught my eye was the level of savings. I think around somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. And so is that just the cost of water and sanitary sewer charges, or is there labor embedded in that, or how did that number come?
No, that's just utility rates built
rates
into the spreadsheet.
Okay.
Are there other questions? let's move on to our continuing business. And first, we have climate impacts and adaptation pursuant to Goal 4 of the Climate Action Plan. And our first item under that heading is a presentation by Jim Roberts, the Environmental Health Director for the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District. Welcome.
Okay, good evening. No presentation, discussion. I heard you talk about Fix the Leak. You know, the Public Health Department, we regulate food establishments. And so every March 31st, I send out an invoice for their annual permit renewal. And I was thinking when you were talking that, you know, if you have this program of Fix the Leak, I could reach a high water usage group of people, you know, like with a flyer or something like that, as long as it doesn't cost the health district more in postage or something like that. So, so every end of March, I reach about 700 plus food establishments, and then in the county, which will also be an aquifer, we reach about 325 establishments in early November. So something to think about. Okay. Can you hear me on this? I move over a little. Jim Roberts, Director of Environmental Health for the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District for many years. And I don't have a presentation like a PowerPoint, but what I thought I'd do was kind of give you an overview about what the essential services are of public health, and you can see how they maybe mesh with some of the things that you have heard before. And then Scott shared with me a presentation by someone earlier in the year, and I just copied a few of their slides, and I can kind of tell you how public health might relate to something like that. Now, I don't know, Scott, did you give them the? It was in their packet. Yes, the climate change, measuring the public health role, kind of overview that the American Public Health Association has done. And a lot of information in there, and I don't want to go over that, but the most important page to me tonight is page 76. Sometimes people don't understand what public health does, and so there are 10 essential services of public health. And the first one is monitor the health status. Whether it's related to diseases associated with climate change or not, public health every day is monitoring health status of both reportable and non-reportable diseases. Some of the diseases are reportable to the Illinois Department of Public Health, some aren't. And so, but we do passive surveillance. If we have to, we can do active surveillance. That means by actually calling people or following up on cases. But we do passive surveillance every day. And this is with infectious diseases. This would be something like salmonella, for example. We also have a system in place with the National Center of Supercomputing Applications. We do syndromic surveillance, looking at symptoms. And so they get information from various data sources, and then if they see a spike in diarrheal type of cases, then we kind of look into it a little bit more and do some more active surveillance. And so we have both infectious diseases, non-infectious diseases, some syndromic surveillance, but we really don't have very many non-infectious disease type things that maybe might be related to climatic change. It's my understanding that they're looking at those somewhere down the road. Next thing we do as an essential service is investigation of foodborne, vector-borne, or waterborne outbreaks. And I've done the foodborne outbreaks many, many times. Over my last 30 plus years of experience, I've maybe worked on one or two waterborne outbreaks, and luckily I've not worked on any vector-borne outbreaks, although we have worked on cases. You know, if a case come in, we might do an environmental investigation or follow up to see maybe if we could find where someone may have picked up West Nile virus, for example. Informing the public and policymakers about health impacts of anything. And I know of climatic change, we don't have anything specific with that, but I thought I'd just bring an example of what we do. You know, West Nile virus is an infectious disease, and we'll talk about precipitation and temperature associated with it. So one of the things we do is we do inform the public. In this case, with West Nile virus, we have public campaigns. We do press releases. I get myself in the media, whether it's print or TV. And so that's one of the things that we do on a regular basis. And then also, too, maybe you can remember back to H1N1, how public health involved itself with informing people, both the public and policymakers, as we had to make decisions during that. And then the next thing is mobilized community partnerships. And again, with West Nile virus, we have small grants through the Illinois Department of Public Health, but also we partner with the cities of Urbana, Champaign, and the village of Savoy to have increased surveillance and abatement. When West Nile virus first came into existence in Illinois in the early part of the last decade, the Illinois Natural History Survey, the medical entomology group, involved themselves with the cities and the village. Since 2010, it's been the public health district and no longer medical entomology. So we work with partners all the time. And then I was looking at some of the other partners, and maybe this has to deal with the built environment that you may be discussing, is that another part of public health, they had a grant called We Choose Health, and they were able to get involved with new partners, which public health had never been involved with before. The city planners, for example, they worked at having those bike lanes and doing some other things, I think sidewalks and stuff like that as well. So that was a new area of partnering with public health. And then number 5, they talk about policies and plans that support individual and community health efforts, and they gave an example of municipal heat wave preparedness plans. Public health, since 9/11, has been involved with the other agencies in our community dealing with emergency preparedness planning, and so we have a liaison with the county EMA, and we use that when we do outbreak type situations, or like when we respond to the Gifford tornado, we use our emergency preparedness planning that we have. So I think we have some of the infrastructure in place, whether it's climatic change or something else, that we use on a daily basis. You can also see that right now, enforcing laws and regulations, the local public health department does not have any laws and regulations related to climate change. And it looks like the American Public Health Association would see a little role for that in the future as well. And then there are some other topics here, too, of the essential services. But any questions maybe on the essential services, of where maybe public health meshes with this? Then what I thought I would do is just kind of maybe go over some of the slides that you were given earlier in the year. I think not too sure who the presenter was at the time.
Molly Wollison from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center at the University of Illinois.
Right, and she talked about precipitation impacts, about seeing what might be the effect of that, and then also extreme precipitation impacts. And from a public health standpoint, they talked about, I think she talked about too, maybe the impact of waterborne disease, that you may see some increases of waterborne disease. And I think this has been a problem in other communities, such as the city of Milwaukee. They had a large rain event, and then they ended up having a problem with, I believe it was Cryptosporidium, a parasite at the time, getting into the water treatment plant. Luckily for us, we have a groundwater supply of water, and so yeah, I urge everything you can do to protect that groundwater supply. And then, too, with high heat summers, we have had problems not so much with water quality, but with water amount, especially in the northwestern part of our county. Some of the wells are shallow, and they are in a different aquifer. They're in a shallower aquifer and not in the Mahomet aquifer. And so we've had complaints that we have had to deal with regarding that type of weather event. And I think it's probably significant to understand that most of the irrigation wells that are being drilled in the county are being done in the northern part of the county as well. And they do impact those shorter depth wells. But I don't think I have anything else associated with that other than they talked about precipitation impacts. You talked about flooding in the springtime. This is not a problem so much with the mosquitoes that cause West Nile virus, but they are problematic with mosquitoes that are nuisance mosquitoes. They can fly long distances after a spring flood. The eggs hatch, and they can fly long distances looking for a blood meal. But they're nuisance mosquitoes and are not known at this time to carry any diseases. The other place where public health would have an impact is temperature. And specifically, again, with arthropod or mosquito-borne type of diseases, hot, dry summers are perfect for the activity of West Nile virus of circulating between the bird population and mosquito population, and sometimes with humans. And so any of these vector-borne diseases are probably going to be responsible for both rainfall and temperature. And what is of concern is that some of these diseases are not found in Illinois or Champaign County today. Yellow fever may have been in the past, but it's not around today. But they have dengue fever, another virus called, I probably will not pronounce this correctly, chikungunya fever, and then also there's probably some others as well. They're mostly found in the tropics, but we're starting to find, because of climatic change, that the mosquitoes that may carry this are starting to enter the United States. And then also what's interesting is that I think 2 years ago we found the first tiger mosquitoes in Champaign County. I think we found 2 1 year. The next year we found 30 plus. It does carry tropical diseases, but it's
What
not
kind of
known
mosquito
at
was
this
that?
time.
What kind of mosquito was
Tiger
that?
mosquito.
Oh, tiger.
It's not known at this time to carry West Nile virus or some of the other viruses that are endemic to this area, but that is something that we are concerned about. And then increased temperature impacts from the slide that was presented to you before in the presentation. They talked about maybe reduced killing of pests. We found something similar to that. Maybe it was 2 years ago when we had that mild winter. The mosquitoes, the Culex mosquitoes that overwintered, all of a sudden they were in large numbers earlier in the season than we had normally expected. You know, in May we usually don't find them, but because of that warmer winter, they were able to survive that winter, and they were more available earlier in the season. So we may be something like that. And then there are other health effects that the local health department does not have activities with. We rely upon the Illinois EPA for airborne or air quality type of issues, and so there may be problems associated with higher ozone levels at the urban areas, increased respiratory disorders, maybe increased mold or algae blooms or pollen counts. But again, the local health department is not involved with that, but the EPA is. And then two, in discussing this with my coworkers, one of the things that they felt that hasn't been discussed is that maybe some of the mental health effects from the traumatic weather changes that our population may be experiencing. So that's something that they suggested I mention as well. So that's what I have.
All right, other comments or questions?
You just mentioned something that kind of stood out to me. I'm relatively new to Illinois this time around, and dengue fever. When I think of dengue fever, I'm thinking that's not Illinois, but that's in this area now, huh?
No, not yet. We do get a few cases, but they're usually travelers that have gone
All
to
brought back.
brought back, right?
Oh, okay.
But in Florida, they have experienced dengue fever, and they see it creeping up.
It's scary.
It is scary. Yeah. They call it broken bone fever because it gets in the joints and it's very painful.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions? Todd?
So you just mentioned a whole bunch of different possible concerns. Sounds like a lot disease related, through vector transmission. Sounds like a lot of mosquitoes and insects.
Mm-hmm.
And then, response to heat waves and other extreme events. Do you have any sense of prioritization, or which things are you, which of those things that you talked about, which categories of things are most concerning to you, or do you see having, most significant impact on public health or public health district budget?
Well, I think the most significant thing is the most immediate one is West Nile virus. I mean, we've had a surveillance and abatement program for the last few years. The abatement program is, maybe you've seen the people on the bikes going through the community. They're dropping mosquito larvicide briquettes into the catch basins to destroy the mosquito larvicide population. Because West Nile virus is endemic, and we're trying to keep that population low so we don't have a lot of West Nile virus activity. So this is something that we deal with on an annual basis. And so far we've had adequate funding to be able to do adequate surveillance and abatement in the catch basins. So.
Thank you.
Okay. And then probably the other thing is probably just complaints. Again, if it's they're drilling deeper wells, I get complaints about why did my water well go dry. We get complaints about maybe the floodwater mosquitoes in springtime because of heavy rains, but it's not a disease type of issue. We'll have problems in food establishments too because you have those hot summers and that poor refrigeration equipment's working very hard in a hot environment. And so we have different issues, but you know, there's nothing that's jumping out as something that's different than what we're doing today.
So you mentioned the irrigation wells, and so if we see a large increase in irrigation wells, I don't know, any chances for increase that maybe there's a irrigation well with subpar construction and, you know, leading to contamination?
I hope not, because that's part of our job.
Okay.
Our job
Okay.
is we issue construction permits, and what we're looking for is how they're constructed and where they're located so that there's no contamination sources. And they have to be constructed according to the code. And so what we do is we verify that too during, not only in paper, but we verify out in the field as well. Hope not. And we also are involved in water well sealing. And so if you wanted to seal a well, either individually or hire a contractor, we have a construction log for that. We don't charge for that permit, but we do have the responsibility of making sure that wells are sealed properly.
Jim, do you all permit, monitor both irrigation wells and potable wells, or is that a different agency?
No, we do both. Any water well that's drilled.
And how far back do your records go?
The county, where all these wells really are drilled, we obtained responsibility through an intergovernmental agreement in about 1998. The Illinois Department of Public Health, and then also we give the well information to, I think it's the Geological Survey. They go back further than that.
Okay. I asked that because from time to time the city annexes property into the city, and if there were a database we could check to see if there was a well historically there, that could be a point of entry to ask the question, was that well properly sealed if it's now going to be an urban space?
Right, I can help you since 1998 then.
Okay.
Okay.
Talk to the university otherwise.
And I can add to that. So what happens, I guess, is the Public Health Department sends the paperwork to the Water Survey, and then we share data with the Water Survey, the Geological Survey. So we have records going back to the 1940s. It depends where you are in the state, but I'd say 1940s, 1930s here.
Okay.
And there actually are records of like dug wells, so people at their farmsteads dug their wells. So there is actually information about that too. So
Great.
either one of the surveys could help you with those questions.
Something we'll have to address someday. Jim, is there any connection with changing weather and climate with Lyme disease carrying ticks?
It's possible. I just don't know enough about that. That would be the whole type of thing that we're looking at, Lyme
Right.
disease or whatever other diseases.
You had mentioned tiger mosquitoes. Is there known diseases that they carry?
They're known to carry yellow fever, dengue fever, I think the chikungunya fever. But they're not, they're capable, supposedly they're capable of carrying West Nile virus and what's called La Crosse encephalitis, which is found in Illinois. But they have not been shown to do so in Illinois, but they're capable of doing that. And the range is expanding over time. It seems to be a very adaptable mosquito to temperature where you wouldn't think it would be, but it seems to be doing so.
Okay. So wet conditions favor the non-disease carrying nuisance mosquitoes. Significant dry periods favor the Culex, which carries West Nile virus.
Right. Hot and dry.
As does mild winters.
Mild winters, I think, had an effect on the mortality of the overwintering mosquitoes, female mosquitoes. They go into catch basins, someplace that's warm,
Mhm.
and they hide out.
Is there any sense of a time horizon where you're planning that you may have to have a program for another disease just as you do for West Nile virus?
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
so at this time. Unfortunately, sometimes when something's new, that's how public health reacts, and then we seek answers to that. But
Yeah.
What I guess I should add, too, is that this area was endemic to St. Louis encephalitis and still is. But since the introduction of West Nile virus in the early part of the last decade, these mosquitoes appear no longer to be carrying St. Louis encephalitis, which there was local outbreaks. I think the last big one was in 1975. So.
I'm wondering about heat waves, and in this community, in this county, do you have any sense of what's the how many people are affected by those events? Needing help or assistance.
I don't know offhand.
Okay.
But, we work with the county EMA on preparedness plans regarding all sorts of natural disasters, including heat waves. And I know that the health district is one of the cooling sites.
Okay. And in those preparedness plans, are there designs for being able to accommodate a certain number of people, or?
I think, for example, if you were talking about a heat wave plan, that they have designated cooling centers that they open up, and that they have memorandums understanding that those would be opened up.
Okay. I was just trying to get a sense for if we're looking at a potential for more heat waves in the future, how much of our population is that going to be affecting?
I don't know offhand.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a common theme in a lot of climate adaptation efforts across the country, is expanding cool zones, and part of it is air-conditioned buildings, but another part of it is outdoor spaces that are shaded, that have passive cooling, water flowing, creates a cooler microenvironment, that sort of thing.
Think that then.
What's that?
Think that then, because hot and dry,
Right.
and then you have this water, for cooling maybe, but that's where the mosquitoes are. That's where the birds are going to get drinks, and that's where the mosquitoes are hanging around to bite the birds. And so when we have surveillance traps that we set out, and that's where we find a lot of our mosquitoes is in.
So like a
environments.
public fountain type situation?
No, that water's circulating, and so the larvae can't be there. But if you had a natural flowing stream,
Mhm.
and it starts to dry up, and you get pools of water, and these mosquitoes like to lay their eggs in nasty organic water.
Okay.
I just want to go back. You mentioned earlier that going after mosquitoes with a larvae treatment in the catch basins. I'm hopeful, but I thought I'd ask, does that affect all the mosquito types, or is it specific to one type?
Well, we're after the Culex mosquitoes, but I'm sure it affects all the mosquito types. It's a larvicide.
Great, thanks.
And we rotate our larvicides about every 3 years. We do it every year, but we rotate the type of larvicide about every 3 years. So we don't have any resistance locally.
Anyone else?
Jim, part of this exercise of having different folks come and talk about adaptation is to see if there's anything relevant to the city geographically and relevant to the city in terms of what they can have an effect on or control that we should be thinking about and planning for an adaptation. Do you have any recommendations for things that we should be planning for, or specific activities we should be considering?
I think, at least from my viewpoint, I would appreciate continued funding through the Public Works Department of the money that they contribute to the surveillance and abatement program, because that allows us to set out mosquito traps in Urbana to detect. We collect these mosquitoes, and then we're able to detect the virus in our lab back at the office, and so we can give early warnings if we detect the presence of West Nile virus starting to move in the populations. And so by also having the money, we're able to do this abatement program by putting the larvicide in the catch basins. So I would appreciate continued support of that.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate your time and your expertise. I think what we have next is our discussion of climate impacts and adaptation. And Scott, I believe you had some slides to show us on that.
Not showing up on your screens, is it? I think maybe it went to sleep mode. Okay, since we've first started having folks come and talk to us about climate adaptation, I've been trying to just take notes and hit the highlights. So I'll just go through them real quick as a sort of summary exercise. So it's part of our existing first phase of our climate action plan. My slides are moving, but yours aren't. There we go. And we've talked about the difference between impacts and adaptation. Impacts is what climate does. Adaptation is what we do in response. Planning strategy has been to use the SAC as the body to do this study and to host experts to come and talk to us. And we've discussed having short statements with some citations to the the research or the testimony in our next phase of our climate action plan. Planning strategy, I've shown this before. If there's phase 1 of the climate action plan, phase 2, and future reassessment in the in the future. Our time frame again is this calendar year to have phase 2 of our climate action plan with adaptation considered in it. This is the schedule we've been working to follow. So today, climate adaptation review. And we had one more speaker, a quick review, and then we'll also talk about greenhouse gas inventory. Continue that next month. That says commercial behaviors. It should be industrial behaviors, industrial facilities. Coincidentally, I'm working with the Economic Development Corporation to set up a roundtable with industrial facilities to talk about energy efficiency. What are the barriers? How do we get over the barriers? So that's one of the goals in the plan, and so we're working to get with the EDC to affect that one. There are some really good impact studies from US EPA. There's a really good one from CMAP for the Chicago region. Then we had Molly Willison from the Midwestern Climate Center talk about, zooming in even further to our region. And I've summarized her main points in her presentation in her document: higher temps and more extreme temps, more non-summer precipitation, more summer drought, more freeze-thaw. Combination of hot, dry weather may increase mosquito-borne disease transmission. We heard a lot about that tonight. And then adaptation. So this gets to all of our other guest speakers from different agencies. And so I've just tried to hit the highlights here, and we can discuss if we're missing something. First, more variable and higher peak water demand may be accommodated, is already accommodated by excess capacity. So the water company talked about how in years past they had built new facilities expecting a lot of new users, particularly ethanol plants, and those did not materialize, so now they have excess capacity. So in terms of higher water demand because of dry years, we really have that taken care of in terms of supply. Narrower roadway geometries may help to adapt to shorter roadway life cycles. So we have more freeze-thaw cycles. Roadways may break apart faster, but we may be able to accommodate that by having narrower roadway geometries, which are being promoted for walkability as well in economic development reasons. So there may be some dual benefits there. Elevate stormwater design standards to adapt to more intense storm events. That's something we talked about with Public Works. If we have more severe storm events, are we able to, do we have the infrastructure that's going to handle those? What Public Works talked about is all of their design parameters are sort of state-based. They come out of, I think it's a professional association design book, and that's, those numbers are put together for over years of research, and it's always backward-looking research rather than forward-looking research. So we discussed, is there a way that we can engage with that group to get them to look forward and with an eye towards a future that's not going to be the same as the past. Yes.
Just to interrupt real quick, I think it's interesting to just point out the interaction between those last 2 points. So, narrow roadways and the stormwater design standards. Obviously, yeah, you know where I'm going, right? Narrow roadways is less stormwater infiltration. Anyway, just had to point that out.
Right. Stormwater Master Plan is something that we've discussed several times here, and this would incorporate several of the previous topics, and that that's with an eye to adapt to more intense storm events. Such a thing would probably work to include co-benefits as well, such as useful recreational green infrastructure that does work for stormwater management at the same time. And then I just added, based on our presentation tonight, continued funding for the West Nile virus program. So I'll open that up to discussion, and we'll add, subtract, amend to this. Any
Anyone want to
thoughts?
take the plunge?
Got it all first draft?
Would you mind maybe just forwarding the slides,
Sure.
and maybe we can have another, piece of the agenda next time around
Yeah.
to capture anything that we think of.
Absolutely.
Another. So you have some notes from the past ones. One thing that I would like to do is to go back to the previous recordings of previous meetings, and where we have those presentations. And so I know it's been the last several, but anyway, if there's an easier way than just looking at looking at every meeting, like if we have notes of when those when those presentations were, that would be good. Otherwise, I'll just go through them.
Yeah, I mean, there are minutes, but I don't know that they go to the detail of every recommendation or suggestion. But it's been the last, I think, 3 meetings.
Yeah.
All the videos are posted on the website.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they
so-
list when there's a presenter, so.
Right.
Okay. Good enough.
Other comments? Questions? All right, well, thank you, and we'll continue this a bit of it at our next meeting. It looks like we're turning to new business and the Urbana greenhouse gas inventory.
Okay. Been talking about this for a long time, and I've been spending a lot of time on it for a short time. I've got it on the screen here. This is ICLEI's new Clear Paths greenhouse gas inventory and planning tool. So before, where there was a computer-based, very old style program plus an Excel worksheet, now there is one tool with all of that integrated, and it's cloud-based. It's a great advancement. The city of Urbana was granted early access to test it out. Now all the partners, all the members of ICLEI have access, and because it's cloud-based, it's a continuous development type tool. So basically, they can add updates and make changes at any time, and so that's where they're at. And maybe weekly, I'm sending them emails with, wouldn't it be great if the tool did this instead and do that as well? And I think they appreciate that. We'll see. But this is the home screen when you log in. These links here, and by the way, if anyone wants to dig in further to this, we can meet and get into the numbers and everything if you like. But there's 2 tracks. One is, and this was true of the old tool, one is the government track. So that's if you want to inventory just your city facilities and operations greenhouse gas emissions. I haven't even looked at that yet. The other track is the community scale track. That's everybody, and that's what we've done in the past with our 2007 baseline. Like I said, we had all these data issues plus the tool changing that we went ahead and worked to get a fresh set of data with a fresh tool and reset the 2007 baseline, while at the same time creating a 2013 inventory with our most recent data. So I've opened some of these already, so I don't have to wait for it to load. So you click community scale track. We've got the 2 inventories here, 2007 plus 2013. Go into one of these. You can see the top level navigation, second level navigation is sector based. Over here are all the specific line items that have to do with residential energy, and you can see there's a number of them. And then here's the total greenhouse gas outputs for each one of these. If I go into one, let's say grid electricity, and go into the record that I've submitted, you see naming convention, which eGrid, that's the national report of carbon intensity for each grid region you're in. So, based on how much solar, wind, coal that grid uses, output, times your kilowatts outputs your greenhouse gases. Our electricity input, you can see there's lots of other options that haven't even begun to utilize. Not that these are difficult ones, there are others that are much more tricky, but number of households, populations, and then the outputs down here. You can see some of them aren't in there because I haven't put households. Again, the particular sectors totals, and then the total for your entire inventory for that year in a pie graph. So it's kind of nice. Some interesting things. Each one of these has this little button where if you click it, maybe it's not working right now, it'll let you export that graph in an image. So that's nice. Just to go back. So what's interesting here is the infinite level of detail you can go in if you want. So we don't actually have the number of people who use liquid petroleum gas for home heating in Urbana. What we have is the survey, American Community Survey, Census Survey for the state of Illinois totals. And then you have to do the math outside the tool based on population to get a number. And you go somewhere else to get, well, what's an average person use times the number. So you can see there's an estimate of an estimate of an estimate. And after all that work, you see the total. 830 metric tons from liquid petroleum gas versus 105,000 for residential grid electricity. So there are other home heating fuels in here that there's so few users once you divided it down to our population, it's de minimis and it's not worth the time. In the 2013 inventory, I use even less of these because there's even less folks using liquid petroleum gas in the 2013 American Community Survey results. So this is not this isn't a meter, so to speak, of what's actually going on. This is modeling. And the same is true. You go over to commercial energy, grid gas, grid electric, industrial, the same. Transportation and mobile is an interesting one. Again, there's an infinite number of different entries you can put in here. What we've got is two pieces of data, essentially. One is modeling from the Regional Planning Commission for transportation mode share and the total for each mode. And then there is data from the transit district on their emissions. And what's interesting to note is what a tiny fraction those big diesel buses actually are compared to all of the cars running around. Water and wastewater is an interesting one. The protocol for greenhouse gas inventories and the tool are set up to have water and wastewater completely isolated from all other sectors. However, that is not how our local world is set up. So we don't have a record for, say, the water treatment facility or the sanitary district's grid electricity use. They use the same power that we all use when they turn on a light at their building. We have that consumption captured in either the commercial or the industrial electricity use. So when you scroll down to water and wastewater, you see it's a really tiny amount. You can't even see the slice of the pie for water and wastewater. And that's somewhat deceiving because their electricity and gas, grid electric and grid gas, is already rolled up in either commercial energy or industrial energy. It would be nice to have a finer level of detail, but it wouldn't change our total numbers. It would just be shifting them from one sector to another. And a few facilities, even though they're large facilities, compared to all the other commercial or industrial, again, is probably de minimis. So working to get other people at other agencies and other companies to give me data every year just might not be worth it in the end. We also have solid waste. We use just a simple calculator here, and it's built in. So we have our total waste generated. Receiving landfills all have methane capture, and it's just a calculation, and it gives us our total. That is 6 categories. There are a couple other categories here that we are not using. Agriculture is one we're not using for obvious reasons. We don't really have a significant amount of agriculture
What about
within
those chickens?
Yeah, well, the urban chickens in Urbana may be a significant source. Maybe we'll have to include them in the future. There's another category, process and fugitive emissions. That's got an eye towards places where there's significant industrial facilities and they're able to capture process emissions and fugitive emissions. I suspect if you dig in there, you could get into fugitive coolant that leaks from cooling systems. Again, that's a model that's not really measured typically. Am I right? You're nodding your head, Andrew. Yeah, I don't think that's usually measured. I think it's modeled, and if it is measured, it's measured because someone is working to, they're paying a consultant to check their facility and make improvements, and that's not something that everyone does. And then upstream impacts of activities would be, what's the impact before I buy something from this product I'm buying, or consumption may be involved in there too. Those ones that we're not including are not required for a compliant inventory, but they are options for a finer level of detail in the program. So,
Scott,
yes.
One place where so I don't know how significant or if it is significant, but one category of fugitive emissions that we might want to think about is at the wastewater treatment plant, because there's digestion. So whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, that's converting.
Yeah,
that's
that's actually moved over to the wastewater section.
Okay.
And we've got that in there as calculations. So there's one here, a nitrogen and denitrogen process from there. So I'll open that up and show you. So it's a simple formula. Do they use nitrification, denitrification as a step? Yes. The population served. Again, we have to cut out our population from the service territory and cut out campus housing from the territory, because we let the campus claim those emissions. And then there's this industrial multiplier that's a given, and you get the output. So we have a couple of those. Emissions from combustion of digester gas. Our sanitary district burns digester gas, and you see that's really a small amount, 2 metric tons a year is the estimate. So that's the inventories. Again, back to this top level set, there is a category called factor sets. This is a set of behind the scenes calculators that the user sets up. So a lot of the results, a lot of the math that's done doesn't happen unless you set these up. So I'll show you a few. Transportation. We've got 2007 and 2013 national factors. So, for instance, gas passenger vehicle, grams of methane per mile. Now, these are, when we go through the directions for using this tool, a lot of these, they give you a citation, go here and get these numbers. But, when we're doing an inventory, it doesn't necessarily line up when the most recent estimates are made. Census is every 10 years. E-grid is every 2 to 3 years. On-road national factors, I can't remember what the last reporting year for that is. So it's kind of all over the place, and you just have to go and get what you can get and enter it. Others. For waste characterization, we don't have a characterization of, 20% is office paper, 30% is food scrap, anything like that. So we just use 100% mixed. So that's basically a national average that we're using. So that's our multiplier times our total amount landfilled. Grid electricity is the e-grid. So that's pretty straightforward. It's on EPA's website. We just go get it and transcribe the numbers. Growth rates is another interesting one. Again, census is every 10 years. Their factor sets are asking for growth rates every 5 years, and so you have to do the math to get in between. Another interesting one, and you can put growth rates for anything. So anything you can imagine that is going to change over time, you can put a factor set in and let it multiply out. One of the factors that we've put in here that I don't think the previous tool had the capacity to do is the renewable portfolio standard. And you'll see this turns out to be really critical. So we've got negative growth entered in for the renewable portfolio standard. Growth in fuel prices, factor sets for fuel prices. Again, just data you have to go out and get. And this is another interesting one. This is net present value. So in terms of getting into the dollars, there so far ICLEI has not provided any guidance on where to go and get good numbers for this. So that's something I'd like to do. Just haven't had time to get, seek out sources for that. So next category is forecasts. So once you've got your inventory, then you create, you take that 1 year's data point and you create a forecast based on those factor sets. So here's where I'm at, here's the growth, so on and so forth. So I've created a number of forecasts. So the first one should be 2007 to 2050, no RPS. So this is the closest to what we can get to compared to what we had for 2007. Maybe. Where is it? There we go. It's zoomed in for some reason. Hold on. There we are. So this is what the 2007 inventory translates into with no RPS, no interventions, business as usual scenario. And this is kind of an interesting display. We've got our 2050 80% goal right here in this dotted line. We've got our 2020 25% reduction goal here. The colors are sort of automatically generated, so I can't help that it's sort of blue on blue there. And then you can toggle these on and off to get a better sense. So commercial energy, I can turn that off. Transportation, I can turn that off. Residential energy, and you can kind of see what's left. And when you scroll over it, it gives you totals for each year. So when you do this, you see, it becomes clear what a tiny fraction water and wastewater, at least the parts that aren't grid gas and grid electric, are, what a tiny fraction solid waste is, and what a tiny fraction industrial energy is. That's also accepting the challenge of Ameren being able to divide commercial energy versus industrial energy. So you turn these back on. A few other things I wanted to show about forecasts. Let's see. This next one, so this is what we were just showing. This is the business as usual, no RPS. This is business as usual with the RPS. And you can see how significant the RPS is. So there's an inflection point right here. The RPS goes to 2025, and then there's no legislation for a renewable portfolio standard afterwards. So it inflects back to growth because of population growth, essentially. So that's really interesting because here's our 2020 goal. And here is about 2020 right here. So what it looks like, and ICLEI has offered to do some quality control, and we need it because every day I'm finding little errors and changes that I need to make, and the graphs change a little bit. But ICLEI's offered to do some quality control and make sure that we're using the RPS right, we're using the interventions that I'll show you in a minute right. But that's really interesting that it looks like the RPS is really doing the heavy lifting for us. So this is 2013 to 2020 plan projection. And this is based on not the 2007 inventory that the other displays were that I just showed you, but the 2013. Unfortunately, the tool doesn't allow you to take your 2007 inventory, project it out to 2050, but then intervene with your 2013 actual data and move the line accordingly. You have to start over with a new display totally. So that's unfortunate. I don't know if that's something they'll change in the future. But this is 2013 to 2020, and this is based on business as usual, no RPS, business as usual with RPS. Another problem that I just realized when I was preparing for this is, see, you've got these goals here that you can toggle on and off, but the problem is they have you enter the goals as a % reduction from the baseline. Well, for this display, it takes 2013 as the baseline, not 2007. We're not trying to get 25% reduction from 2013. We're trying to get 25% reduction from 2007. So I tried to get around it by adding a different goal that I could toggle on, where I would just do the math of what percentage is left based on where we're at for 2013. And what happens is there's so many rounding in the decimals that while it's pretty much close, when you turn on your adjusted goal and you go up to it, the metric tons absolute total is different, and that drives me nuts. So what I've done is just turn these off here. So that seems like a pretty straightforward fix. I think they can probably work around that. It'll take some time.
Is this data exportable to a spreadsheet? So, doing some of these customized things that you're talking about become possible?
There's a reports tab. I'm running out of space. And the reports are pretty thin right now, pretty straightforward. And they more or less show what you just saw, but in a bar graph instead of a wedge graph.
I see.
But you can export, so you can export as comma separated Excel,
Okay.
or just view it in a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Scott, I apologize if I missed this detail, but
Mhm.
are the RECs that we purchased through the community power purchases reflected in our tracking at all?
So ICLEI has provided guidance that for the renewable portfolio standard, we should enter that in as part of the forecast. So it's kind of the context that you're working in. For the renewable energy credits, they provided guidance that you should enter that as an activity or an intervention that you're going to undertake. So to show you what that looks like, again, this is our, and let me go back just to give you a little better context too. Our 2007 inventory is 539,855. The original inventory that we had was 548,700. So it's different, but it's the same ballpark. Our 2020 25% reduction based on this new 2007 baseline is 404,000. So let's go back over to 2013. So we're looking at really this line right here, right? And it looks like we cross it about 2017 just based on the RPS. So this is a really interesting part of the tool. Down here you can add reduction measures, and I've got this open back here somewhere. Here we go. Here are the reduction measures. They've got a bunch preloaded here, and they're more like templates. You still have to fill out some of the data. There are not that many. In our first phase of our climate action plan, we have like 50 different interventions in there. They do not have that many here. They do have user-defined transportation, user-defined residential energy. So if you've got something, you can go in there and do some of the math and put it in there, and it'll apply to that sector. So I've done a few of these already. They are shown over here. So now we go back. Again, our 2013 to 2020 projection with RPS. I probably have to, oh, there they are. So I hit this drop down. Here they all are. And I've entered RECs as an intervention that reduces carbon intensity of all the electricity in the grid, because all the electricity. And so we add that in. Set an end year. and you can see what it does to the residential sector. Now, the RPS is helping us on all of the sectors electricity grid electricity use, commercial, industrial, residential, because the RPS is statewide. The REX is basically our residential, so that's why that's the only one that goes down. It's 100% REX for everything in aggregation. Correct. There are a few small commercial that qualify. That's too de minimis to go to the trouble for. And you can see here the year dates are in the middle of the little hash marks. So this is 2013, this is 2014. And you can see they don't have a precipitous drop for your intervention. It's a gradual drop from one year to the next. And so that's pretty substantial. What's left here in residential energy is gas consumption, grid gas. So essentially all of the residential electricity is zeroed out from the RECs on the intervention side, not the inventory side, but the intervention side. So that's really significant. Now if we go back to, and this looks great, remember we said our 2020 goal was right above this 400,000 line. And, you know, we're way below it here. If we go back to 2007 to 2050, right now we just have the RPS turned on. If we turn on the RECs again, let's go 2050. Uh-oh. Oh, active. So that's presuming, you know, we do this REX for, you know, up to 2050, pretty significant. But if you look at where our 2050 goal is, 80% reduction, not on track. Do really well with the 2020 goal. But even going out to 2050, we start coming back to our 2020 level. That's a long ways into the future. The renewable energy market 10 years ago looks nothing like it does today. You know, fracking was not a word 10 years ago. So, you know, 35 years from now, what are things going to look like? It's really not possible to predict. But anyway, it gives you a sense. And that's a good summary of the tool.
I guess one other question about that, because the goal is measured sort of at an annual year's emission at a given date, not a cumulative basis. If one had RPS for 5 years and then, purchased RECs for 5 years and then stopped, you're going to revert to essentially, if you're measuring your goal in the year 2020, you know, you could purchase RECs through year 2019, and if you didn't in the year 2020, your goal would be at a different point. You would have emitted less on a cumulative basis, but it wouldn't necessarily count in terms of how we're tracking our goal. Correct?
Can you repeat the last part again?
I'm just saying that, you know, this isn't measuring cumulative emissions. It's measuring, our goal is described as an instantaneous emission rate at a given year.
Our goal is
Right.
a fixed absolute value.
Right.
Yeah. I'm trying to change this so to describe the scenario where we stop, but it's not reloading. Let's try again. So if we take RECs and we put in a scenario where we stop buying them, That doesn't look right, does it? Maybe it is. I'll have to think about that. I'll have to check how we set up the calculator. But it, the big picture is the new 2007 baseline, similar to what we had before. It's as good as I can get based on the data that's available now. The RPS, if I'm putting it in right, looks huge in terms of reaching our goals, but it only goes to 2025, so it's good for reaching our 2020 goal. And recs are significant reduction in our accounting on the intervention side. And also, again, look at this wider time frame, and you look at solid waste, industrial energy, wastewater, which doesn't even show up. Some of these things are really small potatoes.
Scott, thanks
Sorry for saying waste isn't important. Waste is important.
How did you know I was going to come in on that? I was going to mention something about that, though. And I mean, you're absolutely right, accounting for it this way. That's what the tool calls for, and that's what you do. On that note, though, the EPA has come out with a report that if you look at the embedded emissions from our stuff, what we buy, looking at the mining, the manufacturing, the transporting of what we throw away if we had to buy it again, that embedded emission level is actually larger than either our transportation or heating our buildings. So I appreciate you doing it that way, and that's absolutely the right way to do it. But I think generally people will look at that and think, well, solid waste, not a big deal.
Right.
But overall, if we're really going to cut our emissions as a community, it's huge. So just wanted to kind of get that out there, of course. Just a couple random thoughts, and you may have already thought of these. As far as the LP gas, did you try to go about that from the supplier side or just the consumer side? Consumer side?
From census data, American Community Survey.
Okay. I was just thinking there probably aren't a whole lot of providers in the area. Maybe they have some data on quantity sold over a given year.
And their data systems are just like utility company and water company. They don't really, they might have Urbana, Illinois, but is it in the city or not? They don't care. They don't record that because it doesn't really matter for them.
Right. And
so getting that kind of data out of folks who have no reason to ever collect data in the way that we want it is tough.
Yeah, exactly. It's you sharing your frustration on how the tool doesn't always take the data that you have. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was also the de minimis you mentioned as far as refrigerants go. Just wondering how you came about that. Was it that the engineers weren't buying any refrigerants over a given year, or?
I don't have refrigerants in here at all.
No. Oh, okay. Even better. All right.
Yeah.
Great.
And how it compares to, say, commercial electricity consumption, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's a small fraction. And I've been working on this tool for a couple months. At some point, cost-benefit ratio, more refined data
the amount of time
versus
didn't make it
staff
worth
time, you just got to go say, well, it's about 539,000.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I thought I'd ask. Thanks.
I was wondering how so what the percentage of industry was interesting, and I was just wondering how when it's recalculated, how the proportion of transportation, residential, commercial, industrial, those were I think in our phase one report, those four were kind of the big ones, and so I wonder how the proportions compare in this recalculated way to what we had originally.
Yeah. That's a good question. So with what we've got in the report, let's see. there were some big differences in what was reported in our new data sets as industrial versus commercial. So the totals look different in those categories. If you add all the commercial industrial together, both gas and electric, or gas and electric, then it turns out to be pretty close. So there was a lot of accounts in 2007, old data, and 2007 new data that went from the industrial category to the commercial category. No idea why. It's just how the data was queried. In total, if you add them together, it's not that different. There were some, I think, somewhat significant differences in the waste totals. And I think it's just how things were calculated in the so this is 15,000 metric tons. Our previous plan had, it looks like 28,000 metric tons CO2 from waste. So fairly significant difference. In the old tool, there was a waste characterization. I've never seen a waste characterization. So where that data came from, that this is our percentages of different types of waste, I don't know. So we used the national factor. So that could be why we got a different total.
Okay.
Other questions? I was just wondering if you have a sense of when you'll be able to wrap this up, or is that just kind of, you sort of have to see how things go with it
Yeah,
going back and forth?
I'm still waiting on the transportation data for 2013 from RPC. And I think at that point, we'll probably be ready, look at it a few more times, double check some numbers. And I think we'll probably be ready to send it to ICLEI and have them do some quality control. I talk to them by phone and email a lot, and so I know that we're doing the. I'm very confident we're doing the RPS and the RECs correctly, but there may be a checkbox you miss for a certain option, and it changes everything. So, but I don't know when RPC will be done, but when they get that data to us, I think then we can submit it to ICLEI for quality control.
Just a quick question about RECs in the commercial sector. Are there any prospects for a policy or marketing or program or some incentive that would allow RECs, which after all are competitive in the residential sector because they don't cost very much? Is there a chance for that to permeate into the commercial sector at all?
Well, a business can buy RECs already. So Cafe Downtown, they can go to their power bill and say, this is how much I use to equal that many RECs. I can go out and buy them. You can buy it with a credit card online if you want. Or you can put out an RFP and get a competitive bid if you want. Now, a single business is going to have like Microsoft can do a competitive bid for RECs because they use a lot of electricity, but your typical local business would just go online and pay for them on a credit card. So they can do that already. Is that what you had in mind, or do you have something else in mind?
Well, I mean, I guess the reason it's competitive in the residential sector is the customers are pooled into a big buyer and they get a better rate when they do an RFP. So it would have to be, I suppose you're right, there would have to be infrastructure to support that. But there's nothing either from the general utility or from a business association or something like that that would allow pooled customers more competitive bidding.
So there are other pooled commercial customers, and they could offer their pooled group RECs either as if you want to be part of the deal, you have to buy RECs, or it's an option if you're part of the deal. They can do that already. I haven't seen that done. Okay. In terms of commercial energy use and what they get, they are already part of that RPS. So whatever it is this year, 7% or something. They could say 7% of my electricity is renewable because it has to be, because that's a state mandate. Right. So that's the big mechanism that, and you can see the impact it appears to be huge if I've got it set up right.
Other questions? All right, well, we'll be waiting to
Sure.
hear the next chapter of the story.
If I can mention one more thing, let me go back to these different calculators I set up. So I've got one here. It's residential PV photovoltaic, solar panels, 25 additional kilowatts a year. When you run that through and put it on the graph, it doesn't show up. You can't see it. It doesn't make 25 would be like 5 new residential systems. That would be good if we got that every single year. So I had to put, I think it's 10,000 kilowatts a year just to get the graph to move. So I said that just to give you a sense of context of what it takes to bend that graph, because you're fighting growth. The graph already wants to go up, and you're trying to make it not just level but go down. So I've got a few in here. I want to keep building that out, but it can be depressing when you have 500 low flow shower heads. Oh, I need to add a 0 to see the graph move. 2 zeros, and so you start thinking about what interventions are we really going to spend time on.
I believe this information has been in a report that you've given us in the past, but I don't recall off the top of my head. What percentage do we have of people who have opted out of the municipal aggregation?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
And would we need to adjust these numbers to account for that?
We could.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not worth it because
Yeah.
it was like 4% or something.
Okay, so pretty small.
Really small.
And I assume the software adjusts if you've got both an RPS and REX,
Mhm.
that it offsets accordingly, so that
Yeah,
you're not
'cause-
double counting the.
Right, because so to show you, let me turn this off. So this is consumption without RPS. This is consumption with RPS. And then we go and add these other interventions. RPS in this protocol, in this program, is considered part of your forecast. It's part of the trend. And then you go ahead and you add, well, they're not showing up, but you add up all your different reduction measures on top of that. So you have this in mind. Think about interventions, and maybe we'll talk about that next month.
All right, are we ready for the sole source aquifer public comment? And Scott, I know you sent us some draft language in our packets. Let's see here. And Andrew, I know you sent me and Scott an email suggesting that we add a couple of words to line 6 to.
I've got it
Okay.
on the screen too with
Okay.
Andrew's
Good.
edit.
Okay.
Yeah, I just added that because that's a big issue. If they don't have enough water for an irrigation system, they don't drill a well. So they have to do some testing first to see if there's enough water capacity, and then they go ahead and put the well in. But if they don't, then they don't install irrigation system. And they usually, you're talking hundreds to thousands of gallons per minute.
And this is the same language that I posted on the website for folks to just copy and then click Mr. Spalding's email and paste into their email, and then they can, of course, change it as they like.
Are there any other changes that folks would like to see on this? In that case, I'll ask for a motion to forward this language in a memo.
I move to forward it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, that passes. And that wraps up our new business. We have a few announcements. Rain barrel and compost bin sale on May 17th. We've got Bike to Work Day Bike to Work Month is May, and Bike to Work Day is May 15th. And then we've got the Sole Source Aquifer Public Meeting on May 13th, 2014. Informational meeting will be held in Champaign, Illinois from 6:30 p.m. to 7:15 p.m., followed by a formal public hearing from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Both are open to the public. Do we have any other announcements this evening?
Oh, it is part of Bike Month. If anyone happens to be watching tonight and doesn't know, tomorrow is Bike to School Day. So if you have kids who can commute by bike, and that applies both to public schools in the region as well as U of I students have a bike to campus day tomorrow.
Great. Any other announcements? Ryan?
So, do a little personal plug for the IGBA here, but we are unveiling a new program. We are unveiling a Green Business Ally program, which will be a very low-entry program for individuals and businesses and organizations who want to join in the IGBA in supporting green businesses in Illinois. So they'll be doing a few small green practices, but not going the whole stretch with our current program of Green Business Certification, which is 9 sections, 270 credits, and really we've found the cream of the crop want to go through that program. So this will be the large net that we are casting to then create a feeder into the certification program. So it's very, very exciting. And the addition to our website will be going live next week. And I'll send out the link, but we would greatly appreciate it if you send the information to your affiliates, your networks, because we want to make sure this is a very successful program and make sure that we can draw a lot more people into our network that can show their support for green business. So, thank you.
Great. Thanks. Other announcements? All right. Well, see no further business before us. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'll second.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. We are adjourned.